Hi there, I'm Holly Klein with Willamette ESD, and I'm here to talk with you about prompting strategies. So our main goal when we are teaching students new skills is that they become independent in performing those skills. The structure and visual supports that we've been talking about in the course of this training series is going to help considerably in supporting that independence. The next thing we need to look at is how we prompt our students when we are teaching them new skills. So a prompt is different than an instructional cue. So a cue is going to be what you as a parent or a teacher says to the student to let them know what they're supposed to do. So it might be get out your paper and pencil. And a prompt is what we do to help the child succeed in following that instructional cue. So if with the same example, teacher says the instructional cue, take out your paper and pencil, and a prompt might be pointing to the paper and pencil. Okay, so it's what we do to help our students succeed. So it's important that we give the right amount of prompting and that we fade out those prompts so that students are independent in performing that skill, because we don't want to have to follow them around every step of the way telling them what to do. And they don't want it either. So a lot of times when we are teaching new skills, we teach using errorless learning. So that is making sure that the student is successful, that they are doing it the correct way. We teach it right the first time so that they are not incorporating errors into their routine. It's much easier to teach your child to do it the correct way the first time instead of having to go back later and undo part of that routine that wasn't necessary or that was an incorrect step. So that unteaching is really hard. So we try and get in there with new skills and teach it correct the first time. And so what we end up doing is we give more support at first and then we back off to independence. So it's very similar to when you're teaching your child to ride a bike. So we give more support in the beginning. We start with training wheels and we start following along behind your child, holding the bike up, giving full physical support. And pretty soon the wheels come off and you're still doing that. And then sometimes you'll let go but you're right there hanging on for when they wobble. And you just gradually back off the amount of support that you give. And pretty soon your child is independently riding a bike. And so that's very similar to how we teach when we are fading our prompts. And so this errorless learning, it's also important to note that this is something we do for new skills or new routines that later on we do teach students how to handle errors and how to think about those critically and correct those errors and handle being incorrect at times. But when we're first learning, then we like to do the errorless learning so that we make sure that it's taught correctly. So when we are looking at using prompts for teaching students new skills, there's a hierarchy. There's more intrusive prompts and less intrusive prompts that end up then up to independence. So here at the bottom, you'll see full physical assist, and we'll go into detail in each of these. Then partial physical assist. So that's when you start letting go of that bike a little bit. Modeling, verbal cues, visual cues, gestural cues, and then up to independence. So we'll go into detail with those levels. So a full physical prompt is the most support that you could give a student. It may be needed for teaching new skills, or you may start higher up on that hierarchy. So you can do hand under hand support or hand over hand support. So as you can see, the hand over hand on the pencil, getting the student to correctly grasp the pencil and to form the letters. And you're going to, of course, want to back off on that because we want our students doing that on their own. But it's a good way to help teach some of those new skills if a student is brand new at learning. But you do want to back up quickly to partial physical prompt if you can, because some of our students, particularly students with autism, can get accustomed to having that full physical prompt. I've had students who are learning imitation skills and will hold their hands out to have you clap their hands for them. And we really want them to learn that we're not a part of that routine. They're learning the skill and we're backing out so that they can do it on their own. So a partial physical prompt is going to be like a tap or a nudge. You might give the student help in getting started with the step or the skill, or you might let them start and then jump in for a little bit of help. So it's less support than the full physical prompt, but you're just gradually backing out. And then there's modeling. So this strategy works if students have imitation skills. We've talked about video modeling, where you take a video of the skill of somebody performing the skill, either the student or a family member or a peer. And you can find a variety of these video models in online or in packaged forms in DVDs. You can model yourself, so you can show your student what is expected. And then of course, we want them eventually doing that on their own. So it needs to be planful how much support you're giving them. So verbal is still pretty up there as far as giving a lot of support. I caution the use of verbal during teaching new routines because it can be very difficult to fade. So I've had some students who get kind of incorporate it into their routine and they are expecting that the adult says something before they can respond. So it's really hard to fade that out. It's not that you can't talk to your child or anything like that, but when you're teaching a new skill and you're thinking about what kind of prompt am I going to use, you want to keep it as visual as possible and minimize the amount of verbal that you are giving, because it can easily get stuck in their routine and then it's super hard to get out. So I just want to caution you about that. So here's a little cartoon that gives kind of an example of that. When somebody gives you something, you wait for them to say, and what do you say? Then you say thank you. So what we really want for kids is that they learn that somebody gives you something and you say thank you. We don't want them to wait for that verbal cue every time. We want them to be able to do that skill on their own. And then hopefully you all are very familiar with the visual cues. So when your child has an understanding of what pictures or written print mean, then this is a very useful tool. Again, we've talked about how this allows that information to be held in time, frozen in time, and held in your child's brain for future use. So this, I can't emphasize enough how important the visual information is. So this would be, again, just a visual cue as your child's performing the new skill or the routine for them to reference and remember, oh yes, I'm supposed to do this step next. So we can use those visual prompts in different ways to highlight the relevant information. We can use arrows or highlights. We can have borders. Here's a border around what is the relevant information. Where are we at now? I've done that on visual routines where I have a little square around which step are we at, and it gives them just that enough of a visual cue of where are we in that sequence. You can have bold-faced text to highlight what's important. You can do that with size as well. You can use position to give your student a hint at what is the expected behavior or what is the correct response. And again, you're going to want to fade that back so that they're not relying on that all the time. But this example down here is in turn taking, and one clue might be, one visual prompt might be positioning the toy in front of your student when it's their turn. And so that little clue lets them know, oh, it's my turn. And you want to be fading that. That's going to be just a visual prompt that you give them. And then you want to fade that back because you want them paying attention to when the other student has finished their turn, then it's my turn. One strategy that I really, really like for prompting is pre-correction or priming. So pre-correction can be a verbal or a visual prompt given before your child engages in the skill, task, or behavior. So you'll see this a lot with teachers before their students, walk down the hallway. They'll say, hey, okay, remember, and they might even have a visual. We're going to have quiet mouths, hands and feet to ourselves. We're going to walk in single file. And so they give them those reminders ahead of time. So it's fresh in your student's mind. And then they're reinforcing that positive behavior or that expected behavior as it's occurring. So I really like this skill. I use it a lot when to review social information before a student plays with a peer or any kind of thing. It just helps set them off on the right start if you're telling them ahead of time what is expected. And again, that can be done with a verbal or even better, a visual, so that you can just point to it and refer to that. So priming is also a way of letting the student know what to expect in a given situation. So we're going to the hairdresser and they're going to put a cape over you. They're going to have scissors and they're only going to cut your hair. When we're done, then you get a sucker or whatever, but it lets your child know what to expect in a given situation. And again, anytime you can do that visually, that's going to be the best route, because that kind of information sticks in their head. So that's very helpful. But it's definitely a way of setting up your student for success. And then there's gestural prompts. So gestures might be pointing or nodding. So you're either pointing to the correct answer or the correct, like in our example, pointing to get out your paper and pencil, and you're pointing in the direction of their school tools. It might be pointing to your visual sequence strip of what step we're at. Okay, so gestural is a great prompt because that can also easily be faded so that your child is following along that visual routine strip on their own. So where do we start? We start with the least amount of help that your child needs in order to give a correct response. So we want to look at that prompt hierarchy and find something that is closest to independent that our student can do and still perform the skill correctly. So, and it's okay if you end up, say, picking gestural prompt and then realizing as you're going that they're not getting what you're trying to convey, and jumping down for more assistance like a partial physical. That's okay to adjust your prompt level when you're trying to figure out where do I start. So you might end up realizing, oh, they didn't need as much help as I thought they did, or, oh, they needed a little bit more. Either way. The key really is that once you get started with your prompting is that you want to fade back as soon as your child is able to handle less assistance. Because again, our goal is independence. I tell instructional assistants and all the time, you know, your goal is to work yourself out of a job. You know, we want the students doing the work, the skills, the routines on their own. That's what we want for our kids in life, is that independence. So we need to really make sure that we are fading those prompts. So we're going to reduce the level of prompting as soon as possible to prevent your child from being reliant on that prompt. So it's not necessary to go through each prompting level. You may jump from one to the next, you know, to a couple more up the hierarchy, but the key is that you're moving towards independence. So here's an example of fading prompts for a writing assignment, for handwriting. So your full assist might be a full copying the A, and then they are gradually giving less and less support until the child is essentially drawing their A independently. So that's a good example of how to fade your support. So you're not always staying right here and having them copy the full letter. You want to make sure, always have in your mind, independence. I want to move my child towards independence, and that they do this on their own, that they are able to answer and respond and do their schoolwork and their routines on their own. One of the best things you can do to help your child develop this independence is give them time to respond. So you're going to give the instructional cue or the direction, and then you're going to wait 3 to 5 seconds for a response. And that doesn't seem like a lot of time until you're standing there waiting for a response. So really, if you try counting that amount in your head, say, get out your paper and pencil. It's a long time. So we want to make sure we give students time to respond. And this, again, can be so powerful because you would be amazed if you just wait and let them come up with a response on their own, then kids can just blow us away with what they can do. We just have to give them that opportunity. And I know everyone wants our students to succeed. And so it's hard to wait and hard to, possibly have them struggle a little bit, but we really need to give them that time. So then you're going to reinforce a correct response or assist your child with just enough help in order to have a correct response. So we don't want to be right here hovering too much. We want to be there to give support, but not too much that we're giving away the answer or doing everything for our child. And we also have to be aware of unintentionally prompting our child. It's easy sometimes for us to see this in the schools because we have a lot of different people working with your child. And so sometimes a child will consistently give a response to one person and not to another. And then we're like, what's going on there? How come this person can get that response and this person can't? And then we realize that this person is unintentionally prompting the student to the correct response. So it can be really tricky. So sometimes we do that by reinforcing too soon, and our kids can be very adept at kind of watching us and we again get excited that they're doing it correctly, but sometimes we need to let them completely respond and then reinforce that. Because we kind of give the answer away if we reinforce too early. And sometimes same with the facial expressions, because again, we get, like, oh, that's right, and we say it all in our face. And so we need to be careful sometimes when our students are responding, and we try and keep a really neutral face and we kind of look down and away until they respond, and then we give them the feedback. Sometimes a movement or a gesture might lead your student to the correct response. So we have to be very careful. Those prompts that we do are very planned, and we want to make sure that we are giving the correct prompt at the correct time and not unintentionally giving a prompt and thinking that our student is doing it independently. So again, that can be pretty tricky. So we need to watch to make sure we're not positioning items so that the answer is given away. Do you always, set out your students' clothes or the shoes and put them in a certain spot where they know that's part of the routine, and the only way they can complete that routine is if those shoes are there, put in front of them. We want to make sure that children are picking up on some of the natural cues, and not always reliant on us giving them the answer. And then again, not giving enough response time. So sometimes, again, we want our students to succeed. And so sometimes we don't wait long enough to give them time to respond and to give a correct response. And then they can sit back and let us answer it all. So we want to be really careful about that. So again, we have these great help sessions available. So if you are having challenges or if you have questions, we are here to help you. So on Tuesdays between 5 and 6 p.m., we have a Zoom help session, and Thursdays from 11 to 12. We have those two help sessions. You can come at any time during those sessions. We are here to help. We can help create materials for you. We can get supports for your students. We can answer your questions. We are here to help. So good luck and see you later.